time of the year when everybody gets together in the same room, so that's why I always hate to interrupt conversations that are going on. I know there's lots of old friends together that finally get an opportunity to talk, and I have to be the guy that takes an hour away of your life, and particularly at this moment in time, and talk to you about something that, I get to show you 50 amazing PowerPoint slides, which is kind of the opposite of the mission that we're trying to do with exciting robotics programs. Hey, so so I'll just get started here. I think there's like another couple minutes, but I'd like to drone on, so this can help mitigate that. So thank you all for coming. I know everybody here is probably coming here with their own kind of, maybe coming here with own certain goals. I know there's conference junkies out there. I know there's some people that are coming from overseas. So thank you so much for dealing with the time difference. I myself I've been sustained by coffee, Red Bull, and a bunch of other stuff. So if I collapse during this, then just give me a minute, and I think I might wake up. You don't need to call the ambulance right away. But once again, thank you. I thank you for making time for this, and I hope that I can share a little bit with you about how FIRST is implemented in other countries. I know that you see all the promotional material of FIRST in over 80 countries worldwide, and you see all this engagement in other places. I know Australia's been doing really well. We've talked with them a lot. I think it's really cool to kind of see how FIRST can solve problems in other countries. The one thing that I like to see first is it's like a solution, but I think the problem that it solves is different where you go. And like the method and the process behind that and the reasons why people do it, I think are a little different. So I wanted to shed a little bit of light on how that plays into effect in China. That's what I really want to talk about today. And in the next couple slides, I have more of a breakdown of what I want to talk about, so you can kind of make a mental note of that. Of course, I know there's probably other teachers out there, so I did want to state our learning objectives very clearly before I even went into a personal introduction. So hopefully that strikes a chord. So a couple points here first. Who's this weird guy talking to me? I can vouch that I am that weird guy, and so I'll give you a little introduction to what I do and how I got involved. And I really wanted to investigate a little bit of time for people to think about what is FIRST and what makes it special. Because I think it's those things that really once you really understand that, that's what you can understand, like works in other countries and what, like the pieces that you really want to promote. When you have limited resources and limited staff, like what things do you want to emphasize when you're in a different place? Also, how does education differ between the US and China? I'm assuming that most people here are probably from the US, so I wanted to use that as a comparison. So I think that you can see how education is different, like how does that affect the program? Then how does FIRST get localized? So how do we use all those things in the first 3 points and make it a reality in China? How do we grow teams? How do we keep people interested? How do we support sponsors? And then finally, how you can get involved. Because I think now that the program has been growing in size and we have more sponsors, we have more partners, we have more international engagement. We have people from the Shanghai American School here, which I think are a living representation of that, and in all kinds of different programs. So I would like to leave a little time for questions and dialogue in case you want to jump in too. I know that you have a very unique voice in all this. So that way you can kind of leave here knowing that if you want to be part of all this, there's different ways you can get involved. And hopefully if teams are looking to do outreach or they're looking to do things like that, that should give you a couple more options. So first, let's introduce the weird guy. So you can see me there. The picture was taken 2 years ago. We had a competition in Qinghai province, which is a western part of China, pretty underdeveloped, and we have a huge amount of support there from the provincial education bureau. And they give us a ton of resources and support to put on a competition. So I went there, and it was like the first time some of these kids like even saw somebody from a different country. So they went wild, and that was actually me trying to fight them off while they were trying to get my signatures. So, and I am by no means a very impressive person. I just kind of showed up there like anybody else would, and that kind of outpouring I think really shows, even just from being there, you can kind of see the opportunities that are there. So just a really quick intro. I got a bunch of stuff I want to talk about. So I've lived in China for about 7 years. I ran over there right after graduation from university, and I learned the language. I went to a not very international city with a couple friends, and we spent some time there getting to know everything. And then I was a university admissions consultant while I was there, and that's what got me involved with education. And so I've been trying to bridge that gap between international, like different countries in China, particularly when it comes to education. So drawing those resources into FIRST has been one of my big goals. So I work with the partner Samia in China, and I help manage the FIRST program there. I'm also very important, I am not an engineer yet. So I know how this, I feel like I'm kind of the wrong kind of nerd. There's all kinds of nerds here in the FIRST program. So unfortunately, I was not, I didn't get, our school didn't have FIRST when I was there. So I didn't get the engineering bug. I got stuck with languages and a couple other things. So I come to you with that disclaimer. I know that that's a big first thing. And I've been working on China-US education projects for quite a while now. With language instruction, I've done some, I've done different like university projects. I've done some business school things. So I'm always trying to think of the way, like how do we connect the US, particularly the US, but other countries too, and China and education, how can we bring that into FIRST? So that's where I come from. So here's a quick look at what FIRST looks like in China. So in a nutshell, it's everywhere now. We are in all 30, I believe it's 36, like provinces, cities, independent regions. This chart's actually outdated. It goes into 2015, we're all in 2017. So we're well over 3,000 teams across all 4 programs. There's over 30,000 students involved. So it's pretty big. And you can see there, that is, if we actually put a dot for every team, I think you wouldn't be able to see the map of China. So you can see that the only image I'm trying to project here is that you know, it's everywhere. And I think particularly FLL, as I'll explain later, we've gotten a lot of government support from that, which has made the program huge. We have almost a little over about 3,000 teams that do FLL. And then from there, that's kind of fed into other programs. So as these kids get older, they want to do more. And so we've been creating more and more infrastructure to make it work in the older programs. Okay, so I just wanted you to see this too. So the first mission, so this is what the first mission looks like in Chinese. So you can really see that when we localize this stuff, this is a truly global endeavor, and that I think it strikes a chord in China much in the same way that it does here. So, and I really want you to think about that sentence, to transform our culture by creating a world where science and technology are celebrated and where young people dream of becoming science and technology leaders. So if you can kind of mull on that while you look at, I'm going to present to you some of the problems that exist in China in education, and then you can kind of think of how using this mission could solve those problems. And then at the end of the presentation, I'll talk about some of the ways that we've cooked up to do just that. So, and you can really, I want you to mull on too, is like what comes to mind when you think of FIRST? Because when you want to make FIRST work in a different country, you have to really think about what things really strike a chord here, and like how can that really work in a different place? So I know these are some of the buzzwords, these are some of the things that come up. I think these are some of the really valuable things within FIRST. So when you think of FIRST, like some people think of hands-on learning. I know there's a lot of connections there with Lego education. You think gracious professionalism, it's that, you know, you're really out there for all teams, not just yourself. It's about the mentors involved. It's about making STEM education a reality, something from a more abstract concept to something more physical. So I know there's all kinds of different ideas floating out there. So like while I go through this presentation, I'm hoping that you can kind of like, you can use this lens to think about, you know, how can we use these things to really help a different country. So, and with that in mind, I want to talk a little bit about education. This is a very, very quick synopsis. So you can get an idea of how this all fits in. So, overview of Chinese education. So, all I'm trying to do to tell you here is that there are a lot of students in China, right? This should not come as a very big surprise, right? So, a country of 1.3 billion people. In 2014, over 100 million students were enrolled in elementary and secondary school in China. So that would be elementary and middle school in the U.S. In high school. And then in 2014, 13,000 regular high school students in China admitted 8 million new students on top of already 24 million existing enrollments. So just to give you an idea what that number looks like, I believe the population of Massachusetts is 6 million people. So that's a lot of I'm from Massachusetts, so I like to, yeah, there we go. We got a couple other people too. So that should give you an idea of what that number actually physically looks like. So it's a lot of people. And that's not even, there's a couple other things I want to add on that too. But also there's little subtle differences, like for instance, in China, elementary schools, they often go from some go from first to fifth grade, others go from first to sixth grade. So junior high school, so it would be middle schools here, they actually go from in many cases, 6th grade to 9th grade. So high school in China can only be 3 years long. It's not 4 like in the U.S. So that does make the programs, like there's a little bit of, I know like many of the programs are kind of designed with a U.S. age bracket involved. So I think that does create a little bit of differences. But on the whole of things, they do 18 years of education, and the general makeup is the same, right? So you finish high school and you go into college. So some of the bigger differences here, which I think you can see from this chart, kindergarten is optional in China. It is not covered within compulsory education, so you don't get government funding for that. Primary education is normally 6 years, like I said, elementary school. Junior secondary is 3. And what I really wanted to emphasize here is that compulsory education. So when you can find you should be able to find a public school in your area that you can go from school to 1st to 12th grade, and in theory not pay a cent, right? That should be something covered by your local government. In China, that only goes from 1st to 9th grade. So every high school student you see in China, in some way or another, they're paying out of pocket. So that's a big difference. So that does affect the program too. So you see there are a lot more high schools in China that are boarding schools. So students actually live there, and there's other complications there as well. So you can even see here, they see the percentages. That's the amount of students that go from that level into the next. So 99% of elementary schools go into secondary, our middle school. Only 83% actually go into high school. And then from those, only 72% actually go into college. So China has committed 4% of their GDP to education. So if you want to call up your congressman and make sure the U.S. can do that too, that'd be awesome. So they've been, and they're working, I know there's been a lot of talk of expanding that compulsory education limit. So like one of the biggest points I want to make here is that I think the resources are very distributed. There's not, like some provinces are better off than others. Some are a bit more behind. Some students don't have the same privileges as others. So when doing the program, you have to really think of these things. How do we reach out to everyone? So this is like I just said, so compulsory education. The other big difference is that when you go from middle school to high school, it's almost like going to college in the U.S., right? So when you go from high school into college in the U.S., you have to take the SAT. You have all these terrible tests. In China, it's the same thing. For you to go from middle school to high school, you must take a 2-day-long test, and the grades of that decide which school you get into. So it's not like you can just sign up for whatever schools in your area. You actually have to take a thing called the Zhongkao, which literally means the high school test. It can be very difficult. It can take a long time. And it's the same thing for high school to college in China. Although I know I complained very much when I took the SAT here, and that test is like 3 hours, and it's like 3 subjects. And there might be a couple of other tests sprinkled in there, like SAT 2s or whatever. In China, there's 1 test. It takes 2 days. It covers, there's been changes, but it covers about 9 subjects. And there's only 1 shot per year. You literally get 2 days, and if you get sick or if something happens, you're out of luck. You have to wait another year. It's very, very difficult. It's very competitive. So with that in mind, I think I have it on the next slide. I'll go back to that. Yeah, so on that mind, there's a huge amount of pressure to perform well on these tests. Huge. So you can see from the testing area there, you can see that resources are very thin and far between, where students are under an incredible amount of pressure to perform. This test, in many ways, is kind of what decides a student's future. So there is a huge amount of pressure to do that. So sorry that this graph is in Chinese, but you can kind of see what it is, where even if you get a good grade on this test and you get a score, in the U.S., if you take the SAT, you can pretty much find some college somewhere to get into, right? Even if you don't perform very well. There's some schools you don't even need to take the SAT. In China, if you want to get into a university, you have to take this test. And you can see there, this rate's been going up. That's the number of students who actually get into a school after taking the test. So not even every student who takes the university entrance exam gets to go to college. Like the limits are, the spots are limited. So if they don't get in, then they have to either find a private school somewhere, which don't have a good reputation in China, or they have to find a school abroad. So the big point I'm trying to make here is that there is a huge amount of pressure for students to perform well on tests. And that can be, I'll talk to you a little bit later about how we try to confront that with the first program. But many times I think a student feels like they have to pick either, okay, I'm going to try to do well on this test and get into a good school, or I'm going to do robots. Like you can't do both. So that's something that we've been confronting and we've been trying to come up with different solutions for. Also, STEM education in China. I know that you look at all the different promotional flyers for FIRST in the US that talk about we're inspiring new engineers, we're inspiring new scientists, we're inspiring new technology leaders. That's great. We'd like to do the same thing in China. But I will say there's not really a huge shortage at the moment, right? I know a big reason why we try to attract more engineers in the US to do this is that there's kind of like there's a disconnect, right? Like supply doesn't meet demand. So there's not enough engineers out there for the engineering jobs to be filled. So in China, you can just get a look at this. The OECD estimated what percentage of STEM degrees will be given in 2030, and China should be giving 37% of all STEM degrees in the world. So I think part of that is because of the population, of course, but I think another way to analyze that is that there's already a lot of, I think STEM has a very good reputation in China. And like historically, a lot of people have made that the preferred major. So you don't really need to focus that much in China on the whole creating new engineers concept. It's almost like, it's like you give a presentation and like everybody just agrees with you. Like you're not really creating anything new. So maybe one day the US will be like that. So if it first goes well. So actually the conversation is more about creating quality engineers, right? How can we make these engineers more competitive in the workplace? There's a lot of new schools in China like being built, and their engineering programs are very new. So the quality of the engineers that come out can be varied. So I think FIRST fills more of that role, is creating more quality engineers. So a couple quick notes on China national. So overall, so that's the education system, but how about the country as a whole? Social factors, like I said, there's when doing education in FIRST in China, you got to think about there's a lot of pressure on tests. Just like in the US, it's the same conversation of they're trying to find ways to meet the challenges of the next century. That's the same conversation going on there. The same thing with companies need better, more talented workers. It's like the same thing here. You have to create those new skills. You have to create those 21st century skills. So that's the same conversation in China. With technology, I would say that there's a much more emphasis, and the same conversation is had here about really creating hands-on capable people, right? Like being able to solve problems and not just recite test knowledge. I think many employers and schools are looking for that. China has been a bit more sensitive to this, I think, because since it's a developing country, there's many people that maybe don't have the same financial resources available to become more talented. So China wants to be able to look more successful on the international stage. So this is one area where they can do that. Hands-on learning has become more of a, and you'll see in a couple other slides, it's becoming more and more of a conversation. With economics, per capita income is growing. So people in China have more money in their pocket, which allows them to get goods that are a bit more, that were normally out of reach before, particularly on the eastern coast. So there's more opportunities for them to get involved with an international STEM program. So there's more demand for it. Also, entrepreneurism is being promoted heavily right now in China. For all kinds of different reasons for people to fill, people are always worried about there being too many unemployed people, like every country is. And I think many people in the government are creating more resources for accelerators for new companies. And they're looking for people to create those new, smaller businesses that could fill those. I know there's one big successful, if anybody has heard of Alibaba, the company there. Yeah. So that's the golden poster. That's like the golden boy of this whole movement in China. So they're trying to create the next Alibaba, and there's lots of schools and government grants for those kind of people. So FIRST can fit into that quite well. Also, there's more and more people that are studying abroad in the U.S. and all over the world. So they go back and they talk about how great education is here, and they want to implement it in China. So we've had a lot of volunteer engagement from people who studied abroad and then went back to China. That's been a really helpful link. Also political, I'll touch on this very quickly. Please do not see me as a mouthpiece for the Chinese government. This is a very objective view. So I just wanted to say here that the one thing I think, I know when Dean came to China, he liked this concept very much, is that despite whatever you think about politics, for whatever reason, most leaders in China over the past 40 years have actually been engineers. So they actually have engineering degrees. But if you look at many of the politicians in Congress in the U.S., and I'm going to use the U.S. as an example for most of this just because that's where I grew up. You know, there's a lot of people that study law and there's like political science and all that. That's actually not always the case. There's actually a lot more engineers there. So actually there's a word that, like I said, I made that engineering sin and didn't study engineering when I was in school. I did international relations, and there's a word for this called technocrat. So it was actually invented to describe the Chinese government. So it's ruled by engineers. So there's actually, I'd say compared to promoting things in the US, I think a lot of government people that you end up meeting, it's not so difficult to explain some of these engineering concepts to them. At least many people there have some sort of grounded knowledge in that. So that's been helpful. Also, since engineering is a bit less politically sensitive than other projects, that gives an extra boost to STEM programs in China. Like there's no real political issues. At least there's less than other, you know, if you wanted to do some kind of like exchange between, you know, if you imagine trying to do some kind of political exchange or something like that, like a model UN, like that would be much more difficult, a bit more sensitive, so that's another advantage. So this is the premier of China, Li Keqiang, and he actually made a tour in South China of makerspaces there, and he went bananas. He loved it. So now, like, there's actually a lot of official government papers. There's a lot of new initiatives. It happened last year, so I think it's going to go through a bunch of committees, and we'll see something soon. He loved this concept, so I think that, like, from that, there's been a lot of enthusiasm for this kind of stuff. So makerspaces and robotics, STEM, so there's been a lot of interest. So also, on the greater scheme of things, China's been going from, originally Chinese education about 10 years ago was about teaching these bottom two axes, processes and methods and knowledge and skills. And I think many people noticed that if you wanted to create a successful workforce, you also need people with true passions, right? You need people who will drive their own creative pursuits. And for that, you need people who are very motivated to do something. So the government actually added another, so I should say the Education Bureau added another axis on top. They want attitudes and values. They want people who are passionate about what they do. It's very hard to do that through tests, taking tests. So they've been trying to create more channels for people to gain passion for whatever they do. So, and of course, that's something I think FIRST is quite good at. So, right, and the government released a 13th five-year plan where they kind of state their national goals for 5 years. They want innovation-driven development strategy. So they're always, if you read anything from, and you see this in the US too, but they talk about innovation all the time. So I think like some of these buzzwords and some of the missions that we're trying to do intersect quite nicely. All right, and then before I move on to the next part, a note on civil society. This is also another one of those stupid buzzwords that you learn when you're not learning engineering things in college. So that's like the space between like the family and the government, right? If you look in the US, it's quite diverse. You've got church groups, you've got FIRST, you've got Boy Scouts, you've got Girl Scouts, you've got all this stuff. In China, it's very difficult to run things that way. I think things need government approval. In some ways, that's actually kind of stymied. They try to push it down. So there's a new law that was passed where it actually took effect this January, where it's a lot more difficult to register a nonprofit. So you have to be, so when doing FIRST, you'll see like how we deal with these issues. It's kind of hard to use the model that would come to mind first in the USA, just because I think a lot of those same tools and opportunities aren't really there. You have to take a different path. So like I said, you have to work within existing institutions. It's kind of hard to create your own institution and try to get people to do things your way. And also nonprofits are politically sensitive. I think it was a couple of years ago that the Carter Foundation, which stated goal is to promote democracy all over the world, something that I don't have a problem with. A lot of people in Beijing did have a problem with that, and ever since then, nonprofits have been very difficult to work with. So it creates a lot of issues. They don't want people preaching some mission that the government has no control over in China. So. All right, so actually we work with the Ministry of Education and Chinese Association of Science and Technology, and if it weren't for their support, we would not have over 3,000 teams. It's very difficult to grow. It's possible to grow things grassroots, but it's extremely difficult. So if you don't get support from the people on top, it's really hard to move things forward. All right, so a quick note on what the students and teachers like. So students, this will give you an idea. They're extremely busy. They're getting ready for tests. They have a very heavy academic workload. So this is the average high school student like daily plan. So from 6:30 all the way to 11:30, their entire day is booked. They have zero free time. So these are the issues. So when you want to get them involved with an after-school activity, it doesn't matter how interested they are in it. You have to find, like, all right, what time do they actually have? Like, they are very extremely busy. So actually, when I was a college consultant, I would sit down with families and we'd schedule out the students' time, just because you have to, like, you wouldn't believe the amount of time management skills that Chinese students have to deal with. So, and you can get an idea what that looks like here. A lot of students have like some sort of a setup that looks something like this. So the big takeaway is that student time is extremely limited, and that any participation in non-class activities must have some kind of tangible results. It's really hard to promote something just because it's fun. It's like I mean, and like some people respond to that. It's not like, every student is this rigid, like machine that just learns. It's people, I think, and particularly with the parents in the schools, you have to prove that if they do this program, they get something, right? They get some kind of benefit. You can't, it's really hard to just say, oh, it's great, you should try it, the similar conversation happens here, but I think over there it's more amplified. And for the teachers, they're also under a lot of pressure. They have a lot of pressure to improve the school's image, and many of them are promoted based on certifications and student results. So you have to think about how they can, like, also from their point of view, like what things can they benefit from if they do a robotics program. Of course, the same, like, you meet very passionate, like, motivated teachers who just spend all their time on this because they love it, and of course that's great. But if you want to grow this to something bigger, I think you really have to think about, what kind of things can they really, how can this help them in whatever their goals are? You have to make that intersection somewhere. So as a good example, this is a teacher named is Mr. Gao. He's in Hunan province, and I just visited his school about 2 weeks ago. And this is actually a great example where his team, he's the example of a really passionate teacher, and his team qualified into the national finals of China for FTC, and it was a huge honor. It was a first-year team, so they were extremely pumped. Like, they couldn't believe they actually got in, and the school would not let them go because they said it would interfere with their studies too much. So this teacher, actually, I don't know how he did this, he secretly got them to the competition. He secretly got them there, and thankfully he did win the control award. So he came back and he got a little bit of good words from staff. But even to this day, there's a lot of drama between him and the administration because he went out and did this. So that's like the kind of, that's a good example, like this kind of struggle where it's like you have to show people like what they can get. It's everything's limited. So I'll touch on this really quickly. So when it comes to Chinese students going abroad for school, particularly if anybody out there is with a university, this is kind of what it looks like. From my college consulting days, we tried to promote 4 different skills for students to bring together if they wanted to study overseas. And that was a platform. So when they fill out an application for school and when an admissions person sees them, they'd have to display that they have the intellectual ability, that they're smart, they're creative, they can persist in something, and that their English is good enough. I think many students in China are quite smart, but I think when it comes to showing their persistence and creativity, it's really hard to do that through just a test. So that's something that FIRST can do quite well. Right, and that's what I just said. Also, some schools abroad that have Chinese students coming. Now, please don't see this as me saying that Chinese students are bad. I think that because of all these this competitive environment that many students in China have to deal with, I think there is a propensity, if you will. There's more of a drive for students to do anything possible to get ahead in a competition or in whatever they're trying to get. So Zinch is an educational consulting company in China that does market research. They found that of 250 students applying to schools abroad in, I think it was 2011, that 90% had false letters of recommendation, 70% didn't write their own essay, and 50% wrote awards they did not receive. So this is not saying that Chinese students are bad. It's saying that the pressure to get somewhere is so great, and like the parents, like the students get this one chance to do well, that I think people will really try hard to get any help they possibly could. And the only reason I bring this up is because we've been able to, I think, adapt this we've been able to adapt this this force, I guess, into something more positive in FIRST in China. So I only present this to you because I think ultimately we can find a way to make this work for the program. Also, for Chinese students going abroad, 2013, 200,000 students from the USA went to China, or went from China to the USA. That's 4 times the amount in 2000. So there's more and more competition. Applicants, it's very difficult for students to apply on their own to schools abroad. So this is actually one area where we found a great niche for FIRST to fill to help with this process, is how can students in China use FIRST as a platform to go overseas to study. So, and I'll talk more about that later. Okay, so I did speed through that because I'm worried I put too much information in this PowerPoint. So that's kind of the bigger background. That's kind of what it looks like. And once again, that's a really quick intro. I want to leave some time for questions in case there's anything I didn't touch on that you want to learn. So with all that in mind, how do you localize FIRST somewhere else? How do you make it work? How do you use that same things from that first slide, like that whole creative learning and the mentor culture, and how do you make it work in a place in a different culture and with all those circumstances I just illustrated before? So here's 6 mystery examples of how we do this. So just to give you an idea, number 1, so you see here in the US that FIRST inspires future scientists and engineers. We do the same thing, but we also want to inspire future creative learners. I think this is a way that we really, that's how that message, it's the same message, but I think we use it more localized. We use it towards more local problems than maybe problems faced in the USA. Because of all the test pressures, I think students they lose a lot of opportunities to have that creative edge. And a second example, so FIRST provides a lot of scholarships, which are awesome. And I just talked to Michelle Long, who runs the program this morning, and it's incredible the work that the schools do here to support FIRST and like everything that she does. However, I think that in many cases in China, if students get a scholarship, that's awesome. It's almost like a badge of honor. But what they're really looking for is some sort of college security. I said that with all that test pressure and all those like limited resources, what parents and students really want are a way to feel a bit more at ease when they're looking for a school. And I think that that's something that they're really looking for. So we like to say is FIRST creates university pathways. So how can FIRST help solve the issue of getting into college, right? How can they assist that? I think that in China, that message resonates a bit better than just getting more money for school. Because not to mention, if any students from China are looking to go overseas to study anyway, they probably are willing to put up some sort of financial sacrifice towards this. It's not very cheap to send your child to another country to be educated. So I think they're already prepared to make that financial investment. So having a scholarship helps, but it's not, I think, the primary drive. So the third one, gracious professionalism. So this is exactly the same. This is not changed in any way. I think that the way it really helps is that it shifts away from zero-sum attitudes in education, right? So it's the same thing we do here, right? We really want to show that like through working together, you can achieve more than just by doing some kind of zero-sum competition with somebody else. Like you can do win-wins. I know that this group of people here probably understands it better than anybody else I've ever talked to about this, so I'm not going to go farther into that. Number 4, building a volunteer network. So we do the same thing here, but you can see from all the pressure that teachers get, it can be hard to grow volunteers the same way as the US. I think there's a lot less free time around. So what we like to do instead, we do build volunteers, but we build a professional support network. So we make sure there's trainings available. We make sure that people can get certified in certain things. I think that drives people a bit more into the program. Make it loud, right? As Will.i.am likes to say every time he comes to St. Louis. Hopefully he comes here too. So we do that, but we also we want to show the excitement of education versus rote learning. So that's how we make it loud. And I'll give you an example in a minute of how we do that. And then finally, more than robots, right? So the same thing, but we also, I think FIRST, because of, in China, there's lots of domestic robotics competitors, and just by nature of them organizing in their country and like producing things completely in China, I think they can always beat FIRST on cost. Like the robot will always be cheaper than a FIRST one. So it's like, how do you really show that the quality is there in a FIRST program, right? And so that's something I'll go into detail a little bit later. So here's a couple examples. I just want you to see these things. I'm not going to talk about it too much. So you talk about inspiring future scientists and engineers. This is actually what the Chinese looks like. So once I think you understand these missions that we do. So the global achievement, we talk about things like creating creativity and imagination. We talk about becoming more adaptive to your environment. These are all skills that you cannot learn through tests. And rote instruction, you need to learn this through actually doing something. And I think that this is part of the message that we send through first. So I just want you to be able to visualize it. I'm not going to go into detail. So like this is the same message, and STEM gets promoted. This is what promoting STEM looks like in a different language. So as you can see, those things are very similar, right? So it's the same message. I think it just solves a different problem. All right, second, so this is what we're very excited about this year. So we're talking about university pathways. So even here, I think, I talked to a couple of schools. You see lots of scholarships out there, but I've never actually seen a student, like, with my own eyes, like, get one. Like, the list comes out, you know what happens, you know people apply, but it's really hard to, like, see that connection. So, because of that, we just launched a new program 2 months ago where students from China will be able to submit their admissions information ahead of time. And we're going to invite 5 university officials from the US to come to China in June 1st and 2nd, and they're going to conduct interviews. And at the completion of the competition, it's our biggest competition in China. It's 250 teams across all 4 programs. At the conclusion of that, we're going to have a final ceremony, and they're going to announce their admissions decisions on site with scholarship information. So students will be able to get admissions letters plus scholarships there, like in front of everyone. We're really excited about it. I'm also very happy to say that I think too many people signed up. So if there's any other schools that want to come, we'd be happy to set up interviews. So we'd be more than happy to do that. I talked to a couple other ones here. I think there's actually a budget in case they need some sponsorship in China as well, if they need help with hotels or something. So yeah, we're really excited about this. We're really excited about this. So this year, there's 4 of the schools coming. Macquarie, these are all schools you can see out in the scholarship area. So MSOE, VCU, Western New England, Macquarie, and like I said, students will get scholarships on site too. So these are the full scholarships amount that they get. And like I think what the real message here is that it's providing that security towards university admissions where students, they don't have to give up their study time to do first. Doing first actually gets you into university. So that's the message that we're really trying to promote. And like I think that way parents and teachers will be more willing to have students spend more time on this instead of just doing like studying for tests. So doing first doesn't inhibit you from getting into school, it actually provides you a direct doorway. So like we have sign-up standards and there's a whole process behind it. So we're really excited. So certifications, so because of that maybe getting the right, maybe because of our worried about falsified information coming from some students perhaps to schools abroad, we have a full system of how FIRST is certified in China. So every student in China connected with our registration system, we have like a personal page for each student where awards they get, every competition they've been to, every team they've been in, there's a documentation for that. So, and like you can actually, they can send an email to our headquarters and a student can get a certified certificate of their FIRST experience. So it's all, we got a stamp for it. We can make sure it's all completely verified. Also, students have their own personal space. They have their own competition blog. So if schools are looking for a more complete image of what the student's experience in FIRST was like, the student has an opportunity to write a little bit about it. And they can talk about what they learned at each competition, how their team worked out, how the judging went, all those things. So we're really trying to make sure that students have that right. It's like not only can FIRST like help them with the application of applying overseas, but they can also have something a bit more tangible and certified. They can really have a chance to show, people can actually see what they did in FIRST. They don't have to just talk about it and hope they believe them. So also for the university interviews to help them get in, so we have our own STEM center where each school will get their own special room where they can decorate like their own school. And so students get an idea what the campus is like. And so we're really excited. It's right across the street from where the competition is. So this will, so like I said, I've talked to a couple other schools. If any other schools are interested in getting involved, I'd be more than happy to talk to them. So. right? So here's what that verification system looks like online. So like all the students are there, the information is there. We hope that this could be a potential tool for schools in the future if they'd like to become more involved with First China. Also in China as well, and once again I apologize for the Chinese here. I was too lazy to change. This is an image, not a text box, so I'll just explain it. So we also have a system in China where this is connected with our first Tech Challenge competition, where there's 9, we call it the Elite 9. It's like the 9 highest ranked engineering schools in China. They work with us on FTC, and they announce every year if they want to put on a competition. So this year we actually have one at, we had one at Tsinghua University, which is an extremely competitive engineering school, and also at Tongji University, which is, some people actually might know. They're really well known on the international field now. Excuse me. They put a competition on, and then people who get certain awards and standings, so like the Championship Alliance, the Inspire Award, they actually get added extra points on that really scary test I told you about to get into school. So it'll almost be like if you got like an extra 50 points on the SAT for getting these awards. So we've worked really hard to develop these relationships with schools. So it's all about, so at the end of the day, it's really all about showing that, doing first actually, you can have tangible results like into school, right? It's not just this more opaque kind of, like hard to imagine thing. Like those tools are really out there. Here's a couple of successful cases. So Wei-Han Li did FLL. He's at the University of Maryland now. He received a full scholarship. So these people are out there. There's actually one student that'll be in St. Louis who did all 4 programs in China, and he got a scholarship at the University of Ohio, and now he volunteers at everything. So it's really neat how that all comes together. Like you'd be really surprised at how like this same culture has really caught on in other places. Jason Ren, he's actually an incredible example because I tell you about, we always talk about how some students are worried that doing first inhibits them academically, maybe takes away their time from studying for tests. Well, this student, he actually got the highest score on their version of the SAT in his entire province. So, and he was also an exceptional FLL student. So, I actually have a video of him. He actually met Dean Kamen and like did all this stuff. I'll play this. I have a video of his achievements. I don't know. I think we're. Yeah. If people stick around later, I'll play it for them. I'm just worried about time. But it's really, really neat. Kaining Guo, he's another guy. So he's going to Pennsylvania State University. He works for Mercedes-Benz in Beijing now. And he was the 2009 FLL Beijing champion. Another cool guy. He was actually in St. Louis last year to help out. And like just so you get an idea like that culture looks like, here's that same terrible picture of me. And like, so it's that same, and I want you to appreciate just how rare this can be, where students in China, I feel like many of their education can be very structured and, result-oriented and like all about test scores. And like, it's so rare for people to, this is an FLL competition in a more, like economically challenged area of China. And like for students to actually get together, like put costumes together and like, they actually put on a performance for teams. Like that's so hard to find. That like that first enthusiasm that you see here, or people doing the Cotton Eye Joe and all that kind of stuff, like that really catches on. I think it adds a really this new flavor into programs in China. So that's one way that we always feel very grateful that people were able to create that culture around the world, and then we can bring it there. So I'm gonna touch really quickly on the rest of this. I want to leave a lot of time for questions, and I can go into more detail later on other things. So when it comes to trainings, we actually have a first innovation training system. Actually, that first should be lowercase. In this particular case, we do first and other things too, where we actually have a certification system where if people want to become more involved with, judging, or if they want to become a more professional, I would say, first volunteer, because I know there's people that have been doing volunteering in the U.S. for decades. If you want to create that same network of people, they actually do the trainings. With us, we have different training bases all over the country that you can see here, and they can actually get a certification. And I think these are things that teachers really look for when you want to prove to your administration that this first thing is worth it. They have to see that kind of tangible thing. I think it's really, it's very difficult for them just to talk about how nice first is. I think we all know that, but for somebody who knows nothing about this program and for this concept to be so foreign, you really need to have that like tangible certification there for people to give you time and resources to do it. We also work with a number of partner schools to do trainings there, right? So we've increased this by 8 schools last year. And they do everything from FRC technical trainings to FLL workshops to all kinds of stuff. So volunteer trainings, and they've been very helpful. And it's creating this kind of community that I think has made FIRST very successful here, and one thing that we're trying to do in China as well. We have an app that we use with a FIRST page on it, where people can view online training videos, they can do certifications, they can register for competitions. There's a team finder, so people can find where FIRST teams are in their area based on GPS signaling. So we also try to do this to kind of build that FIRST community. And also, okay, here's the fun stuff. So we have a TV show coming out. There will be an FTC TV show airing in China. So 12 teams will be picked from across China in FIRST Tech Challenge. And from now until June, they will be filmed 3 separate times at schools and at the competition. And they will follow them all the way to Australia in July, where there will be a big international FTC event there. And the film crew will follow them the whole way. And this will be broadcast on Beijing TV in August for 12 weeks into September. And actually, I think a little longer than that, too. So 1 episode a week. So we're super excited about it. I got to meet some of the producers a couple weeks ago in Beijing, and it'll be really fun. Actually, there's an SAS team. So Shanghai American School will actually have a team there for our friends there at their Puxi campus. So here's a timeline, right? I just talked to you about this, so I'm going to speed through the rest of this. And another quick note is that I think that particularly getting the older programs set up in China, like the FTC and FRC, the one thing that we try to do is that, like I said earlier, I think the cost to do these programs, no matter how you slice it, when we have like customs fees to deal with, and there's more transportation you have to work with, there's more trainings you have to do, there's translation, which I think that if somebody were to create a robotics competition in China, like you wouldn't have to face those costs. So no matter how you slice it, I think this program, there's more costs involved. So, and of course, sponsors help us out a lot with that. But at the end of the day, I think this normally ends up costing more than a domestic Chinese program. So, like how we try to distinguish ourselves is really showing that it's a premium kind of education brand. And I guess that's something like very high quality. So what this means is that it's like that college portal that I talked about. This is one way that it's really difficult for that to be created by other competitions. So that's something that we hope can be utilized more in FIRST. That can be something that sets aside the FIRST brand more. Also, one thing that we've been successful with doing is that we've worked at least with our FIRST teams in each program, so as each one rolled out. Like I know in 2011 when FTC first started, we worked a lot with international schools. Also with some of like the top level Chinese high schools. And once people saw that, it would almost be like if people saw a program start at Harvard, I think people would be much more willing to like go with that, right? So in subsequent years, people look at that and be like, oh, well, Harvard's doing it, so no, we got to do it too. So I think we use some of that, at least in the beginning, we use that kind of energy to help the program grow. So FTC, particularly for FTC, it started off with 10 teams in 2011. Now there's about 330. So that's been bearing some fruit. Also, I think that, and this is something that we try to balance the right way, is that first, it is an international program. There's 80 countries that do it, but over 80 countries. But I think particularly with the older programs, the high school level ones, it does, at least in our eyes, like feel more American, I guess. So that's actually been able to work to our advantage in many ways. We're looking to open up those pathways to like great American universities, of which people in China are very interested in. When you're looking into getting involved with big American companies, like people love Apple there. So like creating more of that channel has been successful in building the FIRST brand there. All right, how can you get involved? So you will see on this next slide, this is where I ran out of energy on the plane when I was finishing up this presentation. So please don't judge me that this next slide looks terrible, but I hope the enthusiasm is still there. So if you want to get involved in all this fun stuff, we have a couple of different things going on. So this year, we have the Sino United project. So we've just matched 10 FRC teams in the US with 10 FRC teams in China. And they're all going to come to China at the end of May, build a robot together, and compete in June. So it's going to be super cool. We're thinking about doing something similar next year. If any FRC teams want to get in touch with us. The TV show, we actually have a student actually a recent MIT grad who did FTC in Alaska for like 6 years. He's actually going to be part of the show. If you're in Australia for that event, I know any FTC teams looking to go abroad, the Australia organizer is looking for more teams to go. If you would like to, I'd be happy to get you in touch with her if you're interested in that. I can pass her information on. We'd love to see you get on Chinese programming. If there's a TV crew there. If there's any universities want to get involved with our college program I just said, we're actively recruiting those. We'd love to have more. I think we have a budget in case there's travel issues too. Number 4, on that app that you saw, we put lots of videos on there. If any teams are interested in like contributing, if you want to do like a 10-minute explanation video on something you find in one of these 3 programs, FLL, FEC, or FRC, I think we could find a way to get it on there if you want to improve your outreach that way. And then finally, particularly this year, and I imagine in subsequent years too, around the first week of June, we have a big event in China where we invite teams from all over the world. All 4 programs are there. This year there'll be about 230 teams. If you're interested in coming to one in the future, please let me know. I'd be happy to see if we can arrange that. So that is, I think you all survived. So that's First China. Thank you. So I can't believe I actually was able to finish this 10 minutes early. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer. I did also want to mention that the founder of First in China, Eugene Zhang, is here with us in the back. So just one last note. So Eugene is actually a former NI and NASA engineer and started First China in 2000. And I always really like this because I'm the guy who gets to talk about all this stuff and people think that I did it all. But I really didn't. I get to tell the good news. So thanks to people like Eugene and everybody else, we have this great system that you saw just now. So I know if any questions come up that I can't even answer, I hope that Eugene can show us his gracious professionalism and help me out. But yeah, so.
Jody and all the people here at First have been very supportive for us. And like Andrew said, it's not me or him that does it alone. We do have a big team of First people in the community, the schools, the teachers. Everybody's really, really excited about the program and they support us in many, many ways. And now here in the US as well, many teams have gone to China to help us. And then what Andrew mentioned about the China-US exchange program, we're trying to set up a presence here in the US, so we want to create more of that bridge between China and the US schools. Yeah, we look forward to everybody sort of participating and building that bridge and community together, crossing that language barrier, crossing that 12-hour time zone with us. Thank you.
And one other quick thank you. I know there's so many questions, but so James Beasley and Barbara Boyer are here from the Shanghai American School. They both have been very helpful. I think if you're thinking things from a team perspective, bringing like American team in China, I think they have a lot of great experiences that they can share with us too. So if any questions come up, or if you want to talk to these two, James is in the back and Barbara's right here in the front. They're great resources too. So all right, let's see some questions.
I'm from China and I kind of already stay in U.S. like high school for a year, kind of like escaped from Chinese high school. And I know the first program and I joined it because I came to American high school and already stayed 1 year. But like when in China, like the last year, and I never heard about the first program. I want to know the way you can find team or join the program because I have some friends they also stuck in the Chinese high school and stuff like that. And I'm not like
sure.
Go to America and join fun stuff and it's like abandonment
sure.
stuff like that. So I want to like help them join the first program too.
Sure.
So I want to know like what exactly way
sure.
help them to know the programs.
So if anybody can hear this presentation at least helped one person. Okay. So yeah, I'll give you that app that you just saw. And everything's in there. You can register a team through that, and you can share it with your friends, and they can see where other teams are. So we created that so that people could it'd be easier for people to communicate information. So yeah, if you want to hang around when I'm done, I'll give you everything you need. Any other ones, James?
We're at the Shanghai American School, which you know, and we do have a couple other schools, Dulwich and Concordia, that are partnering with us, and then he's more than welcome to get in touch with our school.
Yeah, sure.
But I wanted to know, out of your 3,000 people that are with FIRST participants, FLL is huge, FTC is huge, FRC is trying to get that stranglehold in China. What problems are you running into with FRC, and how are you overcoming them?
Sure. So I think there's a few of them. I think some of the bigger ones are when you just really think of the, I think a lot of the enthusiasm is there, but when you really think of the logistics behind it, I think that's one of the bigger questions. So when you think of getting kits in China, there's a lot of customs issues. We talked about that. There's a very narrow build time window, and I think that maybe the international schools don't have to deal with this too much, but the Chinese New Year falls right in the middle of build season. So that's like having Christmas. It's even more serious than Christmas. Chinese New Year, like school's gonna be off for 3 weeks, and with a 6-week build season, if schools they literally lock the door, like you can't get into the school in many cases. That can be a big one. So for FRC, what we're really trying to do is make sure that that quality stays the same. I think that there are lots of competitions, like off season, and there was a regional this year too. I personally can't take credit for that one, but you can see that we're trying to make sure that at least the teams become more capable. So like the program that you're involved with, like putting teams in contact with each other from overseas and here, we're hoping that at least from the team perspective, if the will and the technical skills are there, I think that all the rest of the event management, whether it comes to maybe getting like fields in China earlier, somehow we can work with headquarters on that, or if there's like those other logistical problems I think can be solved in the future. But once you have that base of teams that I think are more technically capable and have the structure in place to participate more consistently in the future, like once you have that, you can really, like the rest of the things can be solved. So that's, yeah, I can talk about that more later if you want. There's a lot of different factors in there.
Right.
Anybody else?
Definitely sympathize with you, because I also have a lot of friends that are stuck in Chinese high schools, and yeah, I know the pain. And here comes the question. So, as you said, China's a developing country. A lot of high schools there are actually underdeveloped. So most people there can have their private computers and never have any access to great machine shops and any teachers that can teach them how to use machines that we use here when we just imagine that in the United States. So how should we do this problem? Because most of schools doesn't have a lot of
So that's actually a really interesting question. I think that is something I think about a lot. And we have a great, and just just by seeing me, please know that for FIRST in China to succeed, we have at least like 80 people involved with us in some form or another that are like working on this every day with our network of people there. So I can, I'm sure people have many others to that question too. What I would say is that depending on what program you're in, I know with FLL, we get a lot of support from putting on competitions from the Chinese Science Association of Science and Technology. And from the team level too, we tried to find different tools they can use to get the same experience but at a lower cost. So we actually did find a virtual robotics toolkit. We actually worked with there's a company in Canada that created a fully virtual version of the EV3. And we actually worked with the Chinese Youth Development Foundation to sponsor those kits, those virtual kits for schools all over China. So that if they don't have to pay for a physical robot, it's a lot cheaper, so they can get involved too. And that's we've actually we kicked it off last year, and we've had a few hundred schools that have already installed these in their computer labs. I will be very honest with you. When getting the older programs set up, like FTC and FRC, it's extremely difficult for some of those schools like you mentioned that have less resources to get things off the ground. The costs are a lot higher than the FLL and junior FLL programs. There's a lot more commitment needed from teachers. They need a lot more technical expertise, which is, even think of a chemistry teacher in the US. It takes them a lot of time and skills to get off the ground building a robot too. And for somebody with less resources available, that can be very hard. So we've worked a lot with sponsors. I know Qualcomm sponsored 35 teams in China last year. Apple sponsored a bunch of teams. So Qualcomm actually, they sponsored some teams in Yunnan province, which is a bit more underdeveloped, so we depend on, we love getting help from them to help spread that mission, so it's a difficult question to answer, to be frank. A difficult problem to solve. How's anything else on it? Yeah, so we're working on it. If you have any other ideas, I'd love to hear too.
Is that considered a regional robotics center? I don't know the distance between schools, having a place, a central place that has a bunch of shared resources like larger machines and people that are certified to do that. We have destination Einstein centers that kind of do that, and in addition to the technical things, they also have workshops on the outreach, the business, the marketing, programming, and all that stuff.
So I feel like there's a bunch of plants in the audience because of that. Yeah, I don't know if Jody did this, but anyway, just because we're short on time, I'm going to answer that really quick, and I'll try to get a couple of so the answer is yes. I think in some places we do have resources like that. So we actually just opened a new office in Shanghai. And the partners that we started off as a Lego education distributor. So like through that network, we have that kind of, we do have offices we can use. So in Shanghai, we just got this brand new location. And there's going to be a makerspace in there. There's going to be an FRC field inside. There's going to be a machine shop. There's going to be all kinds of stuff there. At least there's some locations somewhere where people can get involved. And I think in other more localized locations, we've had to depend on schools that are involved with the program. One quick example is we have a partner university in Tianjin, China, which helps us put together, particularly with FRC. It sounded like that was more of an FRC question.
Yeah, we have like at one of the local universities, the water jet.
Yep.
Like,
Same thing.
give them the CAD thing and they'll look for any of the regional.
Yep. So it's actually a vocational college, so they have a lot more machinery involved. I think they have their staff is a bit more. They understand how to actually build a robot more than just like maybe some of the theoretical things behind it. But yeah, so we try to do the same thing. I think it takes a little bit more time to get up and running. But another question?
Yeah. So you talked about how some U.S. teams have gone over and helped start FLL or FTC teams.
Mm-hmm.
And being a Chinese student myself, like, how do you get over the language barrier to start a team there?
Well, you can try to live there and learn the language. That's one way. So the second way is I think that even like for this program that we're running this summer, we do have translators that work with the school, and even in China, English language learning is compulsory there. Like you learn English all the way from first grade. So I think many students, when they get to high school, they can at least carry on a conversation, even if it's a more basic one. So that hasn't been as big of a problem, I think, particularly face to face. Once you try to do things like like emails and stuff like that, I think maybe it's a little bit harder, but that hasn't been too big of an issue. That's a good question. Yeah.
Since First is adjusting its branding for China, is there ever any concern that First China will deviate from First in general mission statement?
So we work really hard to preserve all of the, like First has their own branding standards. They have their own like materials that have, like race professionals defined this way and those things. We never want to deviate from that. I think one of the big things that I wanted to put in this presentation was that like none of that changes, but it's like the way that you promote it. It's like the people that you approach. It's the way you like organize teams. It's the way you do all that stuff. I think there's ways that make it more efficient in China. So we work really hard to make sure that branding stays completely consistent. Yeah. I feel like a press. It's like a White House press thing.
Can you speak to how First internationally is services inside that raises all boats, or is mutually beneficial for all involved in First?
Yeah, so I would say that I think now that we're starting to pay more attention to what happens to students after they finish the program, and I know I've talked to the headquarters a lot on this one, and I think this is something that we could all improve ourselves on as being organizers, to really see, okay, students get involved, they have lots of fun, they do all these events, but like what happens after that? Like, do they really go on and like do all these creative fun things? So I can say that we do have those examples there, and we also have many students. So I think, you know what? Here, let me play that video. I think that alone will say much more than I could. I'll keep it going in the background so I can answer some other questions too. But I think if you hear his story, because he's the epitome of what you're talking about. He came from a very impoverished school, so he did FLL. The school didn't have enough money to buy the mats, so he actually drew them on paper. Like he made like the lines and everything, and then through all that, he ended up getting into China's best engineering school. He got the highest score on his test in the entire province. Fung is the highest score on the SAT in the province. They call it the Galveston. He came in, and he came to Beijing. And if you want to see what the competitions actually look like in China, I have tons of videos. It's a really cool guy.
Yeah, I'm from China, and do you have plan to have more events in China?
Events. Yes, yes. I think so. I think what's been really great is the size of the program in China has reached a point where we can start to do more interesting things. So like for instance, at an event in June, we put all 4 programs together into one competition. We can start doing things like that. We've got more sponsor engagement. So I had a couple more meetings. We're hoping to get more engagement with sponsors, which really help us fund events and like not put that financial pressure on teams. So as these resources keep coming, and like as more teams come in, hopefully from all this university engagement that we're doing, and like hopefully all these things all come together so that we can put on more events. But yes, we are. I think right now we had, official first events in China were I think somewhere in like 90 something this year across all programs. And that's just for competitions. But if you include all the workshops and like kickoffs and all that things, we have like hundreds. So yes, we do plan to do more. I don't know if you're curious about a certain location or
What?
but so the short answer is yes, we are planning to do more events. If you're curious about any particular locations, you can come find me after. Yeah.
How do you guys compete with other existing STEM and robotics programs that exist in China?
So that was so what I was saying on that last slide about the whole like quality education brand. That's I think one of the biggest things that we can do, because I think like many of the domestic competitors that we deal with, like I said, they're normally very new at this, and I think that people really look to a lot of international education. And from our experience with Lego education too, is that the message really catches, or like people really are looking for like the best education in the world.
Those things don't exist in other, with the soccer competitions, that element is not there.
So I would say that if a student only wants to do a robot competition, they build a robot, maybe not with a big team, they do it themselves, and they go home afterwards, and that's all you want to do. You can do that with FIRST, but I think the domestic competitions do that. They can always do that, right? But it's like FIRST. I think what FIRST does really well, even in the U.S. compared to other competitions here, it's like it's not just you build a robot and go on the field and go home. It's like it's about that whole community and like all the schools and like creating all that culture and outreach and all those things. I think that's what really separates FIRST from other programs. So
They don't have those companies. The other ones don't have.
they don't have nearly as much. No, that's I think that's what sets us apart. I think that like I said, I think it's the same in the U.S. too, and that's and I mean you're never gonna. I would love to see a FIRST robot in every school. I think that I do encourage people to do whatever program they feel most comfortable with. I don't want to force this on anyone, but I think that particularly when it comes down to this with that high level of engagement, I think people are really drawn to that. I think FIRST really has cornered that part of the robotics market, so to speak. We are always thinking about ways of how we can scale this. So we actually we do meet with people from First Headquarters all the time about, what can we do to make this more accessible to people who, like I said, I was trying to think of it as like, how does the science teacher in high school actually be able to participate in this, right? How can we make it more easy for them to actually get the technical skills, and how can they get the funding, and how can we do all that? So it's a conversation we have with First Headquarters all the time too. So I think that's on everybody's mind. Anything else? A lot more expressive than I expected. It's great. I thought I was going to fall asleep. Okay. All right, great. Well, if you have any more questions, you can call me after.